Keith, I haven't seen you in forever. How are you?
Good.
Good.
Okay.
I'm doing all right. Yeah,
Haven't
thanks.
saw you in a while.
I know it's been a minute.
Yeah.
Or a few minutes. Hey, how are you?
T. Brown's car out there. You do?
No. Well, I drove right through.
Okay. Okay.
So yeah. We'll give him another minute or two.
Yeah.
Haven't had a chance to.
No.
We'll give him a minute.
Yeah, just.
I'm
So,
not sure I would do it.
yeah, we're also always late to this. So.
Give me time to log on so I can read the slides here.
My entire house is sick of the cold. So, yeah. Happens every 3 weeks. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Just little factories.
All right. Hey Matt, thanks for responding back and stuff. That guy, I appreciate it. There you
Hey, Marty.
You did.
Just kidding.
I understand.
Hey, good morning, everyone. Let's go ahead and get started. So we're gonna let's just review the agenda. We're gonna have discussion about the property tax exemption policies, and Keith's here to help us out with that. We're gonna talk about the tenant-based rental assistance and rapid rehousing, and then we're gonna spend probably most of our time on this review of the non-construction applications that we have received. So are there any questions about any items on the agenda? All right. So the next item on the agenda is public comment. Are there any members of the public who would like to share any comments with the committee this morning? Okay, great. And now we have the February 28th meeting minutes that need to be approved.
I move to approve.
All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. All right, so the first item under new business is the discussion regarding the property tax exemption policies related to affordable housing, and Keith Miller and Matt Cable are going to help us out with this item. So turn it over to you two.
Good, thank you. Good morning.
Good morning.
Thanks for having me. So I invited a few things for you here in the PowerPoint, but please let's stop and talk. Property tax exemptions are one of the toughest things I think we deal with sometimes. Just because it's not always, statutes are not always as clear as we would like them to be. So we read through the gray sometimes. So what I've given you here is part of the statute, 105-278.6, which talks about real and personal property owned by nonprofit organizations providing housing for individuals or families with low to moderate incomes shall be exempt from taxation if, as the real property is actually and exclusively occupied and used by the owner for charitable purposes. 2, the owner is not organized to operate for profit. The next one, I'm not sure, well, we can see if it applies here. I won't read all that, but under this E, then the organization described in the subject for a charitable purpose under the section for a future site for housing for individuals and families. So what we have is we often have low-income housing organizations who buy a site, a property, and they can hold that for up to 10 years, no taxes on it, even although they are not using it for the purpose of long-term housing. Now, as we go along, what you're going to hear is that some of the statute is very, very specific about these properties must be used wholly and exclusively for the purpose of which it is intended, which would be long-term housing. The legislators decided they would let these organizations hold vacant land to develop for up to 10 years with tax exemption. So the property owner must file a written application for exemption during the regular listing period. Regular listing period is January 1 through January 31. Notify the assessor of the type of exemption the owner is seeking. Provide supporting documentation. County assessor will approve or deny the exemption after considering the application, supporting documentation, and applicable statute. Property owner can appeal the assessor's decision to the Board of Equalization Review and continue the appeal to the North Carolina Property Tax Commission, Appellate Court, and finally Supreme Court. This is somewhat of the steps that you go through in applying. You apply, you tell us why that you're applying, you give us the documentation to support your reason, and then we apply the statutes to it, either approved or not. And then the property owner can take that to the next step as far as the appeal process. Next. Chapter 105, the property tax law applies equally to counties and municipalities. Municipalities have no authority to approve or deny property tax exemptions. County assessor has the only authority to approve or deny property tax exemptions. Statute also does not give counties the ability to do assessments. They must take the assessment of the county assessor and not have the ability to do that on their own. They can collect tax, they cannot assess property on their own.
And I'll jump in here. So the AHSP loan agreements have a relationship to general statutes in that Buncombe County loan agreements prohibit obtaining property tax exemption with Buncombe County. So our provisions don't prohibit obtaining municipal property tax exemptions. I know that there was a question about that. It's specific to the county tax that would be applied. This is a contractual agreement between the property owner and Buncombe County. So those agreements have no bearing on the assessor's authority to approve or deny an exemption. So Keith, as the assessor, is going to operate under statutes. So there is the potential that someone with whom we have a loan agreement and have the prohibition as part of that loan agreement could go and seek that property tax exemption. And if it adheres to statutes, they would have to approve, or he would have to approve the exemption, right? So then that puts that loan agreement, and the person who's received the loan would be violating the loan agreement, but not statutes. So that's kind of an interesting scenario. What I can say about the prohibition against seeking the property tax exemption is that prior to the last couple of years, that was applied inconsistently. So some loan agreements had that provision and others did not. But to make it clear and to make it equitable in all, a couple of years ago, the committee did add that provision specifically so that we knew that every agreement that was executed would include that provision. So newer loan agreements have that with certainty. Older agreements may or may not contain that provision.
But if it's inside of town limits, they can seek the municipal exemption, and if it meets the criteria, it shall be approved.
Yes, I wouldn't say a municipal exemption. If you're saying just, can they get this exemption for the city of Asheville? Is that what you mean by that
Yes.
term?
Yeah, if it's an actual person.
City of Asheville, I cannot grant the exemption just for the city of Asheville. It would have to be all the taxing districts, because the property is qualifying for the exemption. And then whatever tax districts associated with the property, the exemption will be applied across those.
Okay.
So, such as the county, you have fire districts and other things that would also be exempt. And then you would have the other municipalities, Black Mountain.
Okay, so while the loan agreement technically only prohibits them from seeking an exemption from county taxes, the practical implication is that they cannot pursue any tax exemptions because it's all or nothing. You can't pick one and not the others. Okay. All right. So I guess one question I have is, have there been situations where affordable housing developers have applied and they believe they meet the criteria that the tax assessor's office concluded, no, we don't think you do? Or is it usually like pretty cut and dry? Like, yeah, it's obviously in or out, or is it sometimes more of a bit of a disagreement or judgment call, or how do you often see it?
I don't think we have very many disagreements with the developers. I think when they start the projects, they are pretty clear and already made a decision if they will qualify or not. They go into the project knowing that.
Yep. They
know most of them have done this before, so they know what it's going to take. So I don't know of any larger complexes which have been built recently or over the past 20 years that I know of that we have had a disagreement with. Now, of course, even in this prohibition situation with the contracts, I want to make sure I say to you is that if one of those owners comes to me and applies and will qualify, I will approve regardless of that prohibition, because the prohibition cannot change the statute.
Right, that they'd be in breach of, like
But
they
they'd
it
be
was
in
millions
breach
of
of
dollars
contract.
back or
That would
something,
be a
right?
whole
So,
different situation.
okay, but that would be Nat's problem. That wouldn't be your problem,
Yeah,
right? Or it'd
that's
be our
right.
problem, right? So, but you just have to follow the law on it. And
Exactly, because the prohibition really has nothing to do with the statute. You can't say that you can't apply. I mean, Buncombe County doesn't have that authority to tell someone you can't apply for the statute. You may ask them not to apply based on a contractual agreement, but you cannot tell them they're automatically disqualified from the statute.
Thank you. And the, so there's different nonprofit developers in the world. There's for-profit developers who work in, work on these projects that are all affordable. And so I've heard that for some of the for-profit developers, I mean, it's a pretty powerful incentive, right? So there are mechanisms where even if the developer is a for-profit entity, they might create at the project level a nonprofit tax exempt entity that would meet the criteria for meeting the tax exemption policy. Is that something that we have seen firsthand, or is that kind of something y'all have awareness around? So, we see a lot of good developers who operate as nonprofit or for-profit, but my question is it correct that this is such a powerful incentive that, developers will create a mechanism such that they will qualify for it, unless there's some reason like they've gotten a loan from the county that says you can't pursue this if you want our funds. Do y'all have any insights on that?
So I think there are mechanisms in which the developer can set up for that benefit. And after the Court of Appeals case for Cane Creek Village in Mitchell County changed the whole landscape and how developers look at that. Because that mechanism worked and no one ever knew it would work. But the appellate court said, yes, it does work. Now,
Could you briefly summarize that?
yeah, so let's talk about that a little bit.
I just remind me of the county and the case was called
It's Cane Creek Village is the apartment complex, and that's Mitchell County.
Mitchell.
And that's the one that was at the appellate court. So what happened is that you had a nonprofit who was obviously there to provide housing across Western North Carolina for low-income individuals. So what happened, they go to a for-profit company and ask the for-profit company if they will finance the project in return for the tax credits under Section 40. But they remain a partner in corporation just as the entity who will manage and be in control. Okay?
The nonprofit does.
Yes, the nonprofit does. And if you read the case from the appellate court, I think there's a few important things in it. And that is, one, that they have to be a nonprofit. Two, they have to be in control of the property. Three, also the appellate court recognized that they have first right of refusal after 15 years to buy the property. So I think the appellate court looked at it and said, they pretty much are an owner, and they have such control here is that we are going to recognize it. So they had 0.1% ownership. And that 0.1% ownership ended up qualifying the whole project for an exemption. So the developers own 99%. They stay for profit. They get the tax credits. They can use the tax credits. The business plan still does not produce any income for that group. They do not get any dividends from it. The rents still stay low. And actually, even if you read the court case, it says Cane Creek Village, they're even losing money because they continue to try and help low-income individuals in these apartments. So just as an indicator is that you have a group of owners who are 99% ownership, all they want are the tax credits. They're looking for no dividends from the project.
And how recent was that decision? Was that a pretty recent decision?
Yes.
2003. I think, are you referring to Bakerfield, Blue Ridge Housing?
Yes, Blue Ridge Housing.
Blue Ridge Housing versus Bakerfield. Bakersville LLC, that was in 2013. I can give you the exact site.
And our loan agreements would make it clear that none of the entities involved in this project, no one's going to go see this, right? So if there's one entity seeking a loan from us, but there's someone else who's not, like, we don't want anybody doing that on this project, right?
Well, our loan agreement is with the person who receives the funding, which is generally the person who's managing the entirety of the project. So we kind of hold the same level. I don't know that if in that scenario, I would look to Kurt to say, can someone else try to seek it? But they're going to be, whoever has control of the property. is generally who we're.
Most of those agreements are with the nonprofit entity that is controlling. We haven't had one, let's say, as complex as the fact situation includes, but most of the agreements that we've had have basically been with the nonprofit entity who's managing the project, requesting money from the county.
Look, Jim Yeoman's, is Jim Yeoman a nonprofit or for-profit?
It's for profit. So the bulk of our loan portfolio is nonprofits, and we have had, I think we have 3 currently open loans that are with a for-profit developer, because both are eligible to receive funding.
Because my last question is, do we feel like we make it clear enough, like early on enough in the process, that when developers are submitting proposals to the county for financial support, that they recognize that this policy is in place? Because I feel like there's been a few conversations, just sort of anecdotally with developers, where they sort of learn about it at some point. They're like, oh no, my conforma didn't contemplate that, and then they realize that's a county policy. So I don't know. Anyway, I mean, I know they can't. We have a lot of different policies. It's up to folks to kind of do their homework on it. But just any thoughts around whether we all kind of seen that there's some confusion on this point, or whether we need to do anything else to just make it really clear as soon as possible, so that people use the right assumptions in planning for the projects.
Right. So it is the prohibition language is included in your contract, will include these terms in the program guidelines. But it's a multi-page document, right? That's not something that would necessarily stand out if you're looking at all the provisions that we have with our program. We generally in the pro forma review are looking to make sure that they've included the property tax. They list them different ways. Every entity's pro forma is a little bit different. But we look to see that they're showing the property tax or not, and we can flag it at that point, so that before we get to the end of application and allocation recommendations by the committee, we can capture it. We do have a non-mandatory preliminary application meeting for any applicant that's interested in seeking the funds. So we can stress that point particularly when we go through that. And we've also considered making that mandatory. There are good and bad aspects of having a mandatory pre-application conference, given the length of the window that we have. You don't necessarily want to preclude anyone from applying because they couldn't make a meeting, a one-time meeting opportunity. But there are certainly then limits if you don't choose to attend a non-mandatory one where we talk more in depth about that, make sure we're clarifying it yet again. They'll miss that. So really we try to put it out up front, and then we remind them of it when we meet at all. And then when we review the performer, we look for it and make sure that they're including it. And sometimes, as you said, they haven't, and so they have to provide a revised budget performer. But oftentimes they leave it included, sometimes they don't.
But when we do RFPs and things like that, that information flow. We're like, hey, we're seeking proposals from folks on affordable housing. They would see information about this in this RFP solicitations and things like that. Okay. All right. What other questions do folks have?
That's really helpful. Thanks.
Not to say we should not sometimes do things differently, but do we see other counties doing this, or have any data points around that?
So we don't have necessarily data points around it. I mean, Buncombe County is more active in the affordable housing lending space than a lot of our neighboring counties, right? And so we can look into, if within their contracts they're making that prohibition. The other thing that we haven't touched on, and if Keith would speak to that, is the way in which that they're taxed. To kind of give a perspective on the amount of tax revenue we're talking about too.
Yeah.
That might be helpful just for this conversation, because it's not like you would think of a single family residential tax or something like that. It's taxed a little differently.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, so there's a couple different scenarios. Is that if you're a developer in which you saw no federal funding, no tax credits, you're not Section 42 under the federal tax code, then you get market value, whatever that is, based on your rents. Okay. But most of these low-income projects are Section 42. And I say that You guys heard that as far as federal income tax section 42, which gives them the tax credits if they keep a low income project. Under section 42, the North Carolina statute says the assessor will value those projects based on their actual incomes, not their market incomes. Okay, so a typical project, no low income housing market value valuation. Section 42 is get valued based upon their actual rents, which sometimes could be 50, 75% less in value than a project in which would not have that funding. Even the projects that which you are discussing, which have the prohibitions, are section 42, and they are being valued as section 42,000. But that doesn't mean that we still have projects that qualify for full exemption, although it could be section 42. It really doesn't matter. The ownership is what matters as far as if they're nonprofits. Yeah.
So does that require the property owner or manager to basically submit to the county tax office, here's our income for the year, and then based on that you assess the taxes, or it's based on actual income or estimated income, or how do you?
Yeah, the actual income is reported to the state of North Carolina. So we get a report every year of all section 42 projects, and it shows us what their income was for the year, and then we revalue those yearly. Those are the only projects within the statute that we have the authority to revalue yearly, rather than just in the report. So we value those based upon what they report to the state.
All right. This is really, really helpful. I mean, it seems like, the most important thing is that we do this really consistently, right? I mean, there's probably arguments for either side. I mean, if we didn't have the property tax policy that we have, so people could seek the exemption. It sounds like most LIHTC developers would do that, right? That's where these projects are going to mostly play out, because they're 100% affordable. So they would apply. They wouldn't have to pay property taxes, but then we also wouldn't have to give them as much money, right? Because they don't pay property taxes. So it's like, I don't know. I guess my question is like, it seems like it could work well either way. We just need to apply it consistently. Would be my kind of take on it.
So,
do you have any other thoughts?
So in terms of the property tax exemption, and there has been conversation, obviously last fall, we talked about that provision and whether it should be included, or opportunities to relieve particular applicants of it, and at what level. Ultimately, we decided to just leave the provision as it was and had been for the last several years. The way that property taxes work is they are an expense that comes in before your debt service coverage ratio. So basically, it's an expense that reduces your operating income, which reduces your capacity to carry that principal debt. We typically come in as a soft loan, so that's what's left over in cash flow can pay us. So it's a matter of the order in which that is received. So if there were no property taxes, the net operating income would be increased, the capacity to borrow and that principal loan would increase, the amount of potential loan from the county would be reduced, but the repayment is less guaranteed, where the tax payment is a guaranteed amount payment, right? So it's a guaranteed revenue where the other is more fluid. It's all kind of
but in a way, from the developer standpoint, it's kind of more favorable, because we can kind of be flexible on the repayment terms from our loans, but property taxes will always have to be paid. No way around that, right? So in a way, it's sort of more favorable from a project financing standpoint in that regard.
I mean, I think ideally, from a developer standpoint, they would want to be able to seek the tax relief and then apply for the maximum principal and apply for the maximum cash flow loan. So I think from their perspective, reducing that operating expense up front is preferred. That gives them more latitude, and they are seeking of a primary loan, the amount of loan they can obtain. But it all just really comes down to the financing structure necessary to deliver the project, right? And the operating pro forma is a part of it. So I think that this conversation will be ongoing, and we can certainly look, at what other counties, kind of our typical model counties, if they're including any kind of provision, and bring that back as we continue to move forward on next year. Project.
Seems like we can Durham chew on this already.
Potentially, yeah.
Well, great. Thanks so much for all the info. I guess the one other piece of information I'd like to say is we just kind of go through the process looking at these projects this year. I mean, for this year, we have the policies that we have, so we could always change them, but probably just kind of stick with what we have for this year, and maybe revisit it for the future. But what would be kind of interesting would be if there's a way we could just, as we're looking at some of the key projects, understand, okay, if they did get the property tax exemption, and let's just assume their pro forma turned out to be dead on, completely correct, that's the income, what would they have been exempted from? Like, what would be the estimated taxes they would have paid but for the exemption? Just because I kind of understand, I mean, we're investing all this money into projects, right? So, but if they were having to pay the property taxes, then how much revenue is that? So we can kind of understand sort of the trade-offs between different minutes. So don't necessarily have to do that on every project, but if y'all might like just take a couple of them and kind of help do that, so we'd understand how it would have been, $50,000 or $40,000 or $18,000 or whatever the number is. So that'd be great. Keith, thanks for coming in this morning. Appreciate it. All right. Next up is the tenant-based rental assistance and rapid rehousing item.
All right. So this item actually came out of a few questions that came up at your last meeting about the current use of tenant-based rental assistance within the Housing Services Program and how that might fit into the rapid rehousing model in Asheville and Buncombe. And so what I wanted to do was provide a brief overview of the housing interventions in our community to sort of set some context. This is a similar diagram I think you all saw a few months ago, just sort of looking at the spectrum of housing interventions and tools that the community uses to help intervene. So looking at the far left, we have households that are at risk of homelessness. This is those unstable situations where people are facing eviction or looking for other resources. And so the community's tool for that is prevention. So often providing some form of rental assistance to help keep that household in the home that they are occupying. Next would be the diversion tool, often used as a way when somebody first experiences homelessness. The idea is to use the quickest, most creative solution possible to restore that person to the previous housing situation that they came from. So sometimes that's a phone call with a landlord. Sometimes it's reaching out to friends and family. It's trying to say, if you were housed last night, is there any way to keep you from being unhoused for the next foreseeable future? In the event that that doesn't happen, we do have people who are experiencing unsheltered homelessness. And so the community has programs in place to provide outreach to help connect them with shelter and housing resources. That includes the next item being emergency shelter. So here's where we're talking about non-congregate shelters, as well as facilities providing dorms or barracks to house people, provide immediate shelter as quickly as possible. We also include transitional housing in one of the community's solutions for homelessness. These are often short-term solutions designed to help people overcome some of their immediate barriers, stabilize, and then start transitioning their way to more stable situations. In this flow chart, you'll see all three of the situations of unsheltered homelessness, emergency shelter, and transitional housing. Those are traditionally grouped as unhoused situations because they are not stable long-term solutions, but they are often a step in the right direction. Moving further down the line of this housing spectrum, we start to look at rapid rehousing, which is where the Within Reach report provided some recommendations about expanding there. And we'll get into some of the details on that. But the idea is really to be able to get people into housing as quickly as possible, to take them either off of the street or out of emergency shelter and place them into stable housing situations. Permanent supportive housing is another tool in the toolbox, and that is designed to help people who have more severe needs and barriers to maintaining stable housing. And then finally, we have independent housing. So this would be anybody that is in safe, stable, long-term housing that doesn't need additional supportive services or financial support. I will point out the one tool that is often brought up in the process is our coordinated entry. And actually, we have an application related to coordinated entry in this year's pool of applicants. Coordinated entry is the triage tool used to bridge the gap between those unhoused situations and stable housing. So that is where community partners come together, assess households' needs, and try to find the most effective solution to place them in stable housing and help them maintain that housing long term.
John, while I have this great graphic, can you run through it real fast again and mark, so I can mark which sections have recommendations from the Living Reach report?
I think there's actually some recommendation tied to pretty much every element, but for this conversation, I just really kind of focused in on the rapid rehousing recommendations as it applies to the requests for TBRA funding.
And our terminology is the same, right, in terms of their report and what we use internally?
Generally, it is. Okay. Yes, there are some nuances, and hopefully this graphic hasn't oversimplified some of the information here. Different programs and different communities, will apply different layers to those definitions, and they'll interact a little bit differently. But generally speaking, we're using the same terminology. So moving to the tenant-based rental assistance versus and rapid rehousing. The Affordable Housing Service Program does allow for tenant-based rental assistance to be an eligible activity and receive funding. The way it's structured in the program is that this is short-term emergency assistance, up to 3 months. The target population are folks who are either at risk of homelessness or experiencing homelessness. There is a $2,500 maximum limit on assistance within the program guidelines. Those costs associated with TBRA, as it's referred to, can include security deposits, utility deposits, first month's rent. And the goal is to help, again, stabilize folks who are at risk of homelessness, help prevent them from becoming homeless. Shifting to rapid rehousing, it sort of takes that same model to the next level. And the idea is that you're looking at rental assistance with ongoing case management. The idea is that you would work with that household for up to 2 years. That's a best practice. If assistance goes beyond 2 years, that's when the community usually starts considering whether or not a household is in need of more intensive services and long-term assistance, such as permanent supportive housing. Costs often include the same security deposits, utility payments, ongoing rental assistance, and factoring in ongoing case management for those households. So it does, as you look at sort of budgeting for a rapid rehousing program, you're considering increased costs for a longer program with more supportive services. And it's a program model that is often effective with households that have those higher needs, often folks that are experiencing chronic homelessness and have been living on the streets for an extended period of time.
Permanent support housing.
Both rapid rehousing and permanent supportive housing.
If someone is like coming from a situation of chronic homelessness though, and they got into housing, it wouldn't be considered rapid rehousing, right? Because by definition, they've been homeless for a long time, right? Because chronically homeless.
Right.
So I just want to make sure I'm using the terminology correctly.
So some of that comes into determining not every tool is the right tool for the individual household. So it's a matter of right sizing those interventions for that person or that household. If it appears that they would be able to stabilize within 2 years, a quick placement through rapid rehousing would be ideal.
Even if someone is coming from that background of chronic homelessness, they get into housing and there's an assessment that this could be successful on that time frame, then that would meet the definition of rapid rehousing.
Yes. The idea is
kind of regardless of what level of supportive services may or may not be needed in that particular case.
correct. And often it's when a household is placed in rapid rehousing and it's determined that their needs are going to be ongoing, then they can be transitioned to more of a permanent supportive housing model.
Okay.
So looking back at the flow chart, where TBRA fits in all of this, along the bottom of the graphic, you'll see TBRA as the Affordable Housing Service Program is structured right now, is focused to the left on folks who are at risk of homelessness, and also could be used as a diversion tool. So if somebody is just recently unhoused, it might be arrears, it might be a security deposit, it may be something that would help get them back into a stable situation as quickly as possible. At the same time, TBRA on the other end of the scale could be used as a rental assistance payment mechanism to support rapid rehousing. So if there is rental assistance available, it would be used in conjunction with case management support for both rapid rehousing and potentially permanent support. So, as it relates to the Within Reach report, one of the recommendations, one of many, was that the community, the continuum of care, referred to as the COC, begin working on a strategy to increase rapid rehousing in the community, whether it's through the number of available units or the funding to support them. And so as the committee were to consider using TBRA to fund rapid rehousing, it would be in the community's best interest to work alongside the continuum of care in that process as they are looking at the available number of units, the available need, or the needs that are present. But then also, if you can go to the next slide, one of the things to consider would be the rental housing inventory at the moment. For an effective rapid rehousing program, you have to have units available. And some of the most consistent feedback that's being made by service providers is just the severe lack of affordable rental units. So having rapid rehousing funds available without units makes that a challenge to overcome. It was one of the reasons as part of the home ARP allocation plan process, those funds, the home consortium chose to direct those funds towards rental unit production over rapid rehousing or tenant-based rental assistance for that purpose, just because of the sheer lack of available units in the community. So as we move forward towards next steps, I think one of the other recommendations from the National Alliance was for the continuum of care to look at its own structure and begin reinforcing how that is set up and creating opportunities for task force and work groups to begin implementing some of these other recommendations. And one of those would be to have a group look at rapid rehousing in the community where the needs and the opportunities are, And so at that point, the county could then participate and consider how it would be best to apply any funding towards that expansion.
And what's the time frame for that?
So from the sound of it, it would be later this year for the continuum of care to be working through to finish up its work on governance structure.
And the governance structure.
To choose a new structure.
Just, yes.
Yeah.
And what's, we have a sense for when they might have any more specific recommendations related to, you know, if you want to expand rapid rehousing, here would be our number one thing we would recommend. Number two, number three, dollars associated with them. Like when might something like that?
I'm not sure when that is. I don't know if Matt has any insight. I know the committee, the Continuum of Care is working on outreach and encampments, coordinated entry, and emergency shelter as sort of their first step in developing policies and procedures for those interventions. So my guess would be that they would tackle those and then move to the next set of recommendations.
Okay. So maybe not real near term, there's some other things kind of ahead of updated recommendations around expansion of rapid rehousing efforts in the community. Okay. Well, this is really helpful, even just kind of understanding some of the, I think I was not thinking about some of the language probably in the most accurate way, so this is helpful. I guess the other thing that would be helpful for me would be kind of just a more full understanding of kind of who does all this work, right? Like currently in the community, right? There's different nonprofit organizations. There's things that the county Health and Human Services does in this space. So, but just kind of a summary of, you know, who's doing it, what level of resources they have available to plug into these different efforts currently. Because I just don't feel as familiar with that as sort of like I'd like to.
Yeah, even if it's just examples, it doesn't have to be an exhaustive list. But just examples to wrap our heads around who's doing what.
And there is, just to kind of touch on that, you know, we know certain providers who are doing work within the space. We have some identified providers of rapid rehousing. It's more than TBRA, but it may not be the best practice of up to 2 years, but we know who they are and kind of what their programs look like. I think we last reviewed those, so that's January, but giving you a sense of who's working in the space kind of along that continuum, that's something to bring back to you, either at a meeting or kind of follow up.
And in terms of the like rapid rehousing, I mean, one of the bullet points here, I think I get the point to make sure I do. Like this effective rapid rehousing requires available units for the affordable rents. I mean, that's the ideal, right? Like affordable units so that the amount that's invested to get people into rapid rehousing is manageable. I mean, theoretically, even if there were just market rate units, could put people into market rate units too, but it would require a greater investment, right? Because
Yes.
if the taxpayers or someone else is having to help subsidize that person getting into housing, the higher the rent is, the higher the amount of support we needed. Right?
Correct.
All right. Any other questions on this item for now?
This is great.
No?
Thanks, Jonathan.
Great. Okay. We now come to the non-construction applications review.
All right, I'll just provide kind of a brief overview, and then among the four of us will take turns presenting the different applications. So just as a reminder, the non-construction projects, these are all the applications we received for non-construction. The total request is just over 1.9 million, and that would support 7.6 million in project activity, right? So that would be our portion of the total projects that's presented in the applications. So what we plan to do today, I know you all have seen very brief snippets about each project at our last meeting, but we'll go by application type and then by project, and review the highlights of each project. We're going to look at the AMI breakdowns just to show what is their target household income that they're serving, as well as look at some of the population demographics that they submitted, just so you're kind of aware of which populations they intend to or anticipate serving. Then we'll look at funding considerations, so what the committee might consider based on staff review, whether that's full or partial, or any other comments about funding. And then at the end, we'll kind of summarize if it is exactly tied to one of our measurable metric goals. For example, it would be like emergency. So that there's a measurable goal, a number that we're trying to reach. What funding all of the requests at their full ask would do in terms of movement in a particular goal area. That's kind of how we'll approach each one. Obviously, we can take questions, about each project as we go through them. There should be 2 slides on each project minimum, and then kind of some summary or collective things about the project. So if there are questions about what we'll take a look at, we'll hand it off to Jake to review the emergency repair grant requests.
Morning. So we are rather familiar with these grant requests, but I'd like to provide you guys a little more in-depth information than we did our last meeting, starting with Asheville Area Habitat for Humanity's Emergency Repair Program. They have submitted a request for $539,000 to support repairs in 77 homes. This will support an overall project budget of just over $1.1 million. They also did submit a application to community development ARPA funding. So again, that is the ARPA money that was given from the county to community development. Of that total, $105,000 would be used in fiscal year 24. So in conjunction with that $530,000 request. Currently, at the time of application submittal, they had a wait list of 49. They are contracted with us right now to provide 45 repairs. It is anticipated by the end of the next fiscal year that they have as many as 90 repairs. So that would give us a need of 94 repairs for Habitat for Humanity on their waiting list once they finish up their contract by the end of the next fiscal year. They are targeting households under 70% AMI. So they are targeting around 6 to 10, it looks like, between 60 to 70% AMI. Looks like around 35-ish, between 31 and 60% AMI, and another 30-ish around under than 30% AMI. They have submitted population demographics that focus on BIPOC communities, people with disabilities, and those older than 55. These are based on applications they have received in the past, and just sort of like a historic look at their program. They describe it as historically marginalized communities. Moving on to mountain housing opportunities, we have a request of $400,000 for 40 homes. This will support a project budget of $1.1 million to assist 120 households overall. And they also did submit a CD ARPA FRF application for $120,000 that seems to be planned to be used within the same fiscal year. So if granted both funds, they would use that $120,000 in the same fiscal year as the $400,000 from HSP. They have 43 people on their waiting list right now. They maintain around that 40 number on their waiting list. So after their current obligations of 24 repairs, this year they have around 59 projects slated by the end of fiscal year 24. The demographics submitted include all households under 50% AMI. And they also target similar demographics as Habitat for people with disabilities, BIPOC communities, and age 55 and older. And then we have Poder Emma's emergency repair request for $182,700. This is to repair 12 homes in This would support an overall budget of $722,000 to assist 73 households overall. They have county ARPA directly from strategic partnerships. They have also applied for an equal amount in CD ARPA FRF, so another 182, 700,000. And they have also requested AHSP admin money in the amount of just over 41,000. They have 42 people on their waiting list currently. It is anticipated they could have as many as 72 people on their waiting list by the end of next fiscal year. We are currently not contracted with them, so they do not have a deliverable that would deduct from that, that we know of. So they could have a need of 114 projects by the end of next fiscal year. We know they are targeting a very specific area. So this would be the Emma community, and then expansion into the urban school district is what they would want to do with these funds. They provide an AMI breakdown where it seems pretty evenly split between anywhere between 50 and 80% AMI, 31 to 50% AMI, and less than 30% AMI. These communities would involve people who are in justice involved, BIPOC, hard to house, households with disabilities, or households that are 55 and over.
Jake, can you remind me what the definition is of hard to house?
Hard to house comes in a variety of ways. It could be people who may have barriers to housing, such as a criminal record, things of that sort. Matt, would you want to elaborate on that?
We have a very specific definition that we share with applicants,
Okay,
so that they're aware of it, and we can get that to you. I don't have it right.
that'd be great.
It's in
That's
my-
the one thing I can't ever quite remember how we define it, so that'd be great.
It's really any barrier to accessing kind of standard housing. It could be a large family size, can make it hard to, there, but we'll give you
Okay.
the specific definition.
Okay, thanks. Sorry to interrupt you, Jake.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think especially in this community, you have like language barriers and things of that sort that would make that population harder to house.
And Jake, I have a quick question on the last slide.
Mhm.
200K committed from ARPA. It's for this exact purpose, right? It's not.
Correct, so it is for their emergency repair program. They are currently working through a grant with Dogwood Health. So they haven't expended the ARPA funds from strategic partnerships. From what's been communicated to us, strategic partnerships is privy to this, and they anticipate starting to draw down that 200,000 sometime this spring. So they are working through their obligation. And we have a last summary slide, which is what you guys have seen before. These are the banners on the top of the staff reports that will communicate leverage ratios, population served, and all that good stuff. With that being said, are there any other questions about our emergency repair? Awesome, thank you guys.
Poor Jake, every time he's in the middle of the presentation, we have a technical issue. So we're going to go reconnect the Zoom, hopefully get the display on the screen. While he's doing that, I will just mention the last slide, which you have in your packets, does discuss the impact. This is an area, the emergency repair is an area where we've actually had quite a bit completed in the time frame for our 2030 goals. And we have quite a few that are committed. So we have 156 completed, we have 69 committed. These applications together represent, wait, I'm doing math on the fly here, 129 additional repairs that could be achieved in terms of meeting that goal, which will leave 146 the balance by 2030. So this has been an area, within our goal setting that we've been successful thus far, and this will continue to advance that effort. So are there any questions about the emergency repair requests?
Not about any of these specific proposals. Just curious if
community should move forward and be funded. Obviously, we would want to contract sooner in the fiscal year, because if they do need additional support, like the program, they are anticipating perhaps requesting funds from the county again. And if we have scope of deliverables, we'll at least have some basis of, this program is functioning, we're able to fund their activities, this is what they've done based on the scope of deliverables. So that again, if they're going to come back for more funding, there's some basis for evaluation of that. All right, so I'm only going to present one application today. So we received one down payment assistance loan request. This was from Mountain Housing Opportunities, which has its own internal down payment assistance program. The request is for $315,000. I'm going to be a little bit brief about this application, just so I can kind of get to the end where I talk about recommendations. So the request, $315,000, would support 10 households. We show no existing county funds because, and if you looked at their application at the beginning, they did show some county funding. The way that the program works is a little bit different. They hold for us some existing, we assigned some prior year down payment assistance a number of years ago. They hold that in a trust and report out on that success, but that's kind of how the county funding has been leveraged. So we show that as zero, not to minimize the fact that they're using their existing assets to leverage and obtain other DPA funding, but just it's not that they have an existing committed grant or other allocation for us right now. The goal, again, 10 households, they would all be anticipated to be within the 60 to 80% AMI range. And working with all populations is anticipated. The only one that they're not showing is justice involved. And that would be largely based on kind of the prior year demographics. So staff comments on this particular project, and we've been working with the staff that have made application on behalf of MHO to discuss these issues. But the project's design doesn't directly adhere to program requirements. The project could be implemented as soon as July 1 if we can address those issues. And the real difference between our program offering and the project is that we offer down payment assistance as a lien that the county issues and holds, right? So we ultimately have a note in deed of trust against the property that owner of the property carries until such time as they sell or transfer it to a non-income qualified buyer. So there's always a receivable due to us. Mountain Housing Opportunities, their down payment assistance program, they, for the purposes of which they're trying to obtain the fund, need to hold the asset. So the down payment assistance would need to be their lien payable due to them as a entity. So that is a barrier. So at this point, consideration of full or partial award may be reasonable. If it is awarded, we may not be able to overcome that obstacle in terms of adhering to our program guidance and meeting their program need. But we are looking at other alternative avenues to provide the program support they're looking for that may better align with the project design. And I don't want to get too far into the weeds on that. I have other applications to get through. But basically looking at potential assignment of other down payment assistance that we've received since we last transferred them down payment assistance in an assignment to actually give them the capacity to leverage those funds to acquire additional DPA money. So it's like transferring the asset or the debt owed back to the county to MHO to receive and report back on as the capital in order to obtain. So that one's kind of, we're working back and forth with the applicant, looking at our options for assignment. Any assignment we would anticipate would have to require board approval. So we may not have all of the answers to whether that's really feasible and something that would be done before allocations need to be made. But at this point, the programs aren't aligning. That's probably a more viable approach to meet this request. So are there any questions about this one? It's in development. All right. There are no questions, and we'll turn it over to Jonathan for TBRA.
So I'll be talking about TBRA again, and maybe segueing a little bit towards the question of who is doing the work in the community. So we have 3 tenant-based rental assistance requests. The first is from the ARC of Buncombe County. They are asking for $25,000, and their plan is to support 15 residents who have intellectual or developmental disabilities. This program provides that rental assistance as well as some housing stabilization, very person-centered case management, but also following up with clients and helping them connect to the community resources outside of the program. Overall, the program aims to serve 37 households this year with an overall budget of $63,000, and the county has already committed to supporting the program through the Coronavirus Fiscal Recovery Fund in the amount of $33,000. Taking a look at the breakdown of the population they are serving, more than half of the households will be under 50% AMI, and they will also be serving BIPOC community, those who are homeless, hard to house, most definitely those with disabilities as the main target of this funding, as well as those who are older than 55. The next is a request from Evelyn Charities, and they have a larger request, $200,000, and they are also proposing to assist 186 households, and the target for that program is households facing homelessness, experiencing unstable housing within the McKinney-Vento definition of homelessness, as well as older adults, 65 and older. The overall project budget of $883,000, and it's worth pointing out that this project is fully funded through the county at this point. They did note that there was some additional donations that are included, but kind of hard to gauge how much that would be. But they have already received a commitment from the County Health and Human Services, as well as the Strategic Partnerships Program. All of the households that they will serve will be under 80% AMI, consistent with the program requirements, and they will be assisting, again, households experiencing homelessness, BIPOC, those with disabilities, and specifically those who are 55 and older. And finally, we have a request from Elida Homes for $15,000 in tenant-based rental assistance. This program focuses on vulnerable youth, 18 to 25, and those who are aging out of foster care. Overall project budget of just over $342,000. This will fit into a much bigger program assisting 107 households, and there is a pending request for $60,000 from the Strategic Partnerships grant. Again, the majority of the households served will be under 50% AMI, with focus on those who have experienced homelessness. In this case, there are more households or individuals who are justice involved as part of serving the youth population. That is something to consider, and those who are also who will also have vouchers. So to provide a little bit of the summary of each of these projects and answer any questions about these tenant-based rental assistance proposals.
I think we're good for now.
Yeah,
Thank
thank
you.
you.
All right, and then the last batch of applicants are the New Start grant.
All right, so the last three applications today, New Start grant proposals, these are new and innovative programs. And again, we got three of these programs here, the first of which is the Asheville-Buncombe Community Land Trust. Now, they have a specific model that they've been using inside the city of Asheville. With help from the city of Asheville, they want to take that model and they want to implement it and bring it to Woodfin. Woodfin has committed some funding towards this. They originally gave $50,000 towards this commitment, and now I believe they have now a 4-year ongoing $50,000 commitment towards that. But essentially what that is establishing one permanently affordable home using their own specific land trust model, where they hold the land and then release it to ensure affordability. They do not have any other funding from the county, I think, outside of the city of Asheville. And their anticipated overall project budget is $300,000. And they're asking Buncombe County for $50,000 to match that original Woodfin grant. It's the next slide here kind of shows, their target. It's a little bit difficult. I mean, they would be targeting household income at or below 80% AMI. But I think it's a little bit challenging for them to kind of establish what exactly that looks like right now. So that's kind of why this slide looks the way it does. The next one is the Mountain Housing Opportunities Resident Services Pilot. And this is to provide on-site supportive residential services at MHO properties. And it'll do a number of things: prevent evictions, improve economic stability, foster overall health, and support educational opportunities, and anticipation of strengthening those community networks and strengthening communities within the MHO properties. There is somewhat, I guess, of existing kind of on-site supportive services that go on at Litech properties, some of which are MHO properties, but I believe it's the Asheville Housing Authority, that City of Asheville, was it the Housing Authority of City of Asheville, HACA, that administers these programs. So this would be bringing that type of kind of on-site supportive services into MHO. And with that, they are anticipating over 5 years serving about 1,000 people, 1,000 residents. They have requested, $50,000 from us, but they've got a number of other funding sources identified. The overall project budget is $982,000. And they, as you can see there, have asked for other funding to help support this new program. Next slide will show you that kind of breakdown of what they're looking at. They're looking at households less than or equal to 50% AMI and serving pretty much about everybody. And the final New Start application that we received, they're requesting $50,000 as well. This is from On Track. This is something you've seen before, but this is different now. They have a different program that they are bringing to us, where they will conduct home buyer watch parties as kind of an education service to individuals with BIPOC community, and along with other things like coffee and credit, where they're going to discuss credit reports, and have credit counselors there to help educate and train some of these home buyers. So they're really introducing a new path to home buying, and the way they are going to measure success is by the number of households engaged in conversation, counseling, and training through these services. There's no existing county funding right now. Their overall project budget is a little over $300,000, and they're hoping to connect with 120 households. Their target is a little bit of everybody as well, at 80% or less, as you can see on the slide.
So New Start, the project prioritization for New Starts, this is supposed to be, you know, new and innovative programs that hopefully this can kind of jumpstart that program, and then that program can be sustained by a variety of different ways in the future. But this kind of gives that initial shot of capital to kind of get going. And let's see here. Similar to the administrative support, they all appear to meet our requirements. And so full or partial award amounts considered.
I have a question about On Track. And I see that Celeste is here, so maybe she can help answer. As we're looking at reaching our goal of homeownership specifically for BIPOC individuals and families in our community, will On Track track the attendees of these events to see how long it does take to obtain homeownership, if at all? And yeah, if someone can help with that, or get back to me, it's fine.
So I would recommend the applicant answer it. We would work those things out in scope, but if,
Yeah.
they can go ahead and describe that.
Here, just says-
So yes, and within a 1 year time period.
Okay.
You're not optimistic that many of the folks living in housing complexes, low-income homes, supported housing, those kinds of things, are going to attain ownership, but the track towards that is what we will be supporting them, moving them along, credit improvement, budget, banking, housing.
Okay.
Yes, it's overall.
Over.
It's
Okay.
Eventually,
yes.
yes.
Thanks. Sorry to.
No, and with On Track, we recognize kind of at the staff level that this is often a multi-year process, right? Here's the path to homeownership, and it's several steps that are often long periods of time. Credit rebuilding takes a significant period of time. So the ability to say, someone served kind of in July of this year and achieves homeownership by June of next year isn't realistic typically for what we would expect. But understanding how they're tracking that metric will be an important part of our scope and just understanding the program.
Yeah, I would think this would be a multi-year process. Okay. Thanks, y'all.
So that is our last set of applications. Again, going into a little bit more detail on each one. Having had more opportunity for the committee to look at the actual applications submitted and review the staff reports, which were distributed to you, as they were created, but then again, formally at this meeting. Are there any other questions? Kind of now that we've reviewed all of the non-construction applications about any or all or questions generally?
I appreciate your all's level of detail in putting this together for us. Thank you. It's very helpful.
I agree, and sure we'll have more questions. I don't have any more wording. Parker, any others?
I of course thought of one. What's the total, out of all these categories, the total ask?
It's 1.9 million. It's in one of the early.
Oh, is it? Okay.
And this
Yes.
is my part.
I'll get you specific for-
So slide 17. 1.947.
Now, I will say, the committee has the capacity to make recommendations this year for obviously the general fund budget request, which is typically around 2.311845. That's been the consistent allocation for the last several years to the program. So those general fund dollars can be applied to all of these activities, some program guidance, provided that they appear. The construction requests, the committee could recommend use of those funds, as well as potentially making a recommendation for use of bond funds. Bond funds wouldn't necessarily be applicable. The one construction project where Affordable Housing Services Program funds would need to be used Again, barring that we can align the project and the program activity with our program guidelines and general statutes, would be help make shelter project. So that wouldn't be a necessarily bond eligible funded project, but could be Portal Housing Services Program and General Fund eligible project. So when you combine those two, the combined ask of non-construction and the help make construction project is sitting at that $2.5 million impasse with a recurring budget of $2.3 million of it. Of course, the committee can recommend or make a request for a higher amount of allocation as well. But that's kind of our standing commitment.
Go back to the issues around the homelessness efforts and some of the working groups that are working on that. You said one of them is the emergency shelter group. I did mention this earlier, but do we have what's the anticipated time frame when they might have some recommendations around that? Just wondering, is that going to potentially fit into our budget cycle this year, or if there is a request, you must have but what the trajectory is around that?
So it is not clear yet when they'll have a deliverable. Right now, our understanding is they're doing basically an inventory of what is our shelter bed capacity, what are our program bed capacity. There was some discussion at the board briefing about the difference between program beds versus shelter beds. But there is a goal in the Within Reach study to increase our shelter bed capacity. That immediate, lower, or high access kind of sheltering in an emergent situation. And so what I'll say about that is they're still in the middle of inventory. They will likely make recommendations kind of for what the need or how we want to try to address that, which will funnel through IAC as the continuum of care. So knowing when they'll have a recommendation that will then become an actionable activity that will then result in the budget, really don't. But I wouldn't anticipate it would be before the county's budget process was finalized in June.
And also just from a process standpoint, we don't necessarily know. Let's say they do a project, or maybe it's two, whatever. There's like a plan, and there's funding needed for it. I mean, we don't necessarily know that it would come through the Affordable Housing Services program. I mean, it might, and we have some projects here that are obviously directly related to homelessness solutions, but some things we just fund out of the budget too. So I guess it could sort of go either way, and just from a process standpoint, sort of thinking about these proposals, but also that's out there, and that seems to be like, creating some kind of additional capacity around emergency shelter is going to be something that's going to come before us soon. So I'm just kind of wondering to what extent we keep some resources available for that, or if the county would just do a budget amendment and not necessarily think about that as like an affordable housing services program. Or anyway, those are just some of the process questions I'm thinking about as I'm thinking about these projects too.
There is capacity, obviously, within the Affordable Housing Services Program to fund construction of shelter. Obviously, that would not open again until next December, right? Based on a recurring schedule. Do an additional call, and that's been discussed kind of back and forth. There will be a need for one this year with the insertion of bond fund availability. But our next anticipated one at this time would open in December. Those funds wouldn't be available until July. So that could meet and be a response to a path forward that's identified for potential shelter construction need. That's really the only thing within the Affordable Housing Services Program that's going to be a shelter.
The county decided, hey, here's a project, we support it, we need to move on it. So we could allocate bond funds towards that. The county just decided, like, this is a project we want to support, right? And it's related to our housing goals.
For like construction project.
If there's an emergency shelter that needs to be constructed, or maybe there's a facility that needs capital upfit needs or something like that, then I'm just, and I don't know if it's too early for the staff to sort of start thinking through some of the different hypotheticals, or maybe not yet because we don't know what the plan's going to be yet.
Statutes are really clear on bond funds supporting construction of units. There is no addressing of construction of other activities to support homelessness. So I don't know that bond funds would necessarily be a path forward addressing homeless shelter construction needs. On affordability needs or permanent supportive housing, right? That's a clear path forward because there is a rental component of housing made available for rental. But shelter construction is not addressed in statute. I wouldn't want to answer
So like
that
the Homeward Bound project would, but a more like congregate emergency shelter facility, perhaps not.
Right, like the Days Inn project, which has a new name, and I would try not to keep calling it Days Inn, but it's the one everybody knows when I say it. The Days Inn project would have been an activity that you could use bond funds to support, right? Because it's a construction, there's a rental component, though it's deeply affordable. If it's a permanently supportive housing activity, it would have been potentially a bond project or a congregate or even non-congregate shelter where there is no revenue generation from rents, would not, under my understanding of the general statute, be an eligible bond expense, but we can confirm with.
All right. Great. Any other questions for this morning?
Good.
All right. Thank you all. Appreciate it.
As a quick reminder on next steps, so we have a meeting scheduled for both April the 11th and 25th at 9 a.m. So following this time frame through the end of April. We currently are slated to meet May 2nd. A number of staff are going to be attending the Bring Deck Home. It's a homelessness training opportunity on the 2nd, so we may look for some alternative dates or determine, as we move forward in April, whether the committee, who have met a lot at that point, would prefer to just hold off on the May meeting and address those items in June. I will mention under the announcements section two things. The first is that the Home Consortium will meet later this week. So there are a number of construction projects that are seeking funding through the consortium. And so those recommendations from the consortium, which follow a 30-day public process, will be made or anticipated to be made later this week. So we'll know if the project has shown home funding, if they've received it. So that will matter in those projects. So that's happening later this week. The other announcements that I would just mention are things that are happening, and we mentioned these again on the 11th, but to go ahead and get it out on the radar. On April 12th and 13th, the BFI will be hosting some site-specific engagement activities at those evenings. The first, on the 12th, will be specifically looking at the downtown properties identified through the feasibility study work and by the board. That will be hosted at 200 College Street. On April 13th, they will be it starts at 6 o'clock.
It's like a community meeting.
Yes.
Okay.
Cool. Yes. And so we will be engaging property owners as well as interested groups who are trying to identify who all to make sure it receives the notice. So obviously, there'll be general notices for social media and other activities that we promote our community engagement work. So DFI, CD staff, and the CAPE team are working on engaging. So that information will be going out later this week. On the 13th is the Irwin Hills site-specific engagement. That will be at Land of Sky, Regional Council of Governments. So we'll be having that there at 6 o'clock. And then on Saturday, there's going to be a virtual meeting opportunity. So we promote all three events collectively. You can engage about all of the sites at any of the meetings. So it's not limited to only discussing the one or two sites, but making sure that we have sites to meet that were proximate to the sites we were talking about, as well as a virtual option to accommodate work schedules.
And the Irwin Properties meeting on the 13th is also 6. It was the 11th and the 6th.
The 12th.
Yeah, 6 o'clock.
Yes.
Sorry. The 12th and the 6th.
The 12th and the 13th.
The 12th.
Yes, at 6, Wednesday the 12th, Thursday the 13th.
All right. All right, if there's nothing else, we are adjourned.